Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavang, it does. They need me.
Welcome to End of Dragons Daily 35, no? So welcome. This is the daily discussion show about the upcoming expansion, End of Dragons, and general Guild Wars 2 good stuff. Here, I'm getting a lot of messages like this at the moment, which is very cool. The Stuffed Iguana saying, I got to admit, these videos have made me start playing the game seriously again. Made a necro, planning on taking things slow and absorbing all the story I've forgotten. Martin P says, yeah, same here. I was on a break from the game until WP started doing these. There was a comment with like a ton of thumbs on 2 episodes back. Just a reminder, this is very cool, guys, and I've experienced this quite a lot as well. As soon as you've got kind of some content to watch about a game regularly, you end up getting into it more. It's really cool. And anyone who is returning, don't forget that the Spud Club is still recruiting. We're bringing new people in. You can go to our Discord in the description to see how to do that. The current plan really is to just gradually keep building the numbers up, which we have been doing the past few weeks with End of Dragons Daily, until the X-Pack comes out, when we'll have a really healthy, high population number of people, and we should be able to tackle the expansion in a fun way. I'm really looking forward to doing that, and seeing the incremental gains so far has been fantastic. So yeah, let's jump in. It's going to be a random variety of comments here today. We're going to be talking about mounts and the gem store a bit. I'm a bit scared of this video. I'm kind of not looking forward to this video. I think some of these topics, like the gem store thing, and to a certain extent some of the elements of the new race discussion we've been having, some of you guys are so bitter in the comments, and it's such a downer reading some of these messages. I don't want to be spending half an hour a day every day talking about all the reasons in which the gem store has corrupted the game. But that's like the majority, and I'm reading every message. The majority of it is like, I don't know, it's a bit of a slog at the moment. But I do want to sort of address some of the big arguments and some of the big discussions that have been coming up. First of all, here's a message from Brian, who seems to think I was like talking about them. I wasn't. I don't know. Look, I'm an egocentric person too as well. But I honestly don't know what you're talking about. But they do have some interesting arguments about why a new race is not good for the game. Arguments I disagree with, but we'll go through the comment. Here we go. He says, I'm doing the thing I said I'll never do. I'm commenting before I finish watching. I feel called out, so I need to return the favor. My comments in the past about a new race not adding enough to the game. Again, I don't really remember what those were. I will have read them, but I never attached them to a name. Were not enough to the game. Were almost entirely focused on the new players, not on veterans. So just to be clear to everyone, in a previous End of Dragons Daily, I made the point that a new race is very good for new people, but vets are blind to its value. So the vets would generally rebel against it more than you would expect. Not all of them. I think there's a lot of vets that would appreciate that too. But, those people who are really no-life in Guild Wars and playing a ton of it, they know how empty the proposition of a new race is, because it doesn't really affect anything mechanically in this game. So Brian says, no, I am talking about new people. And it's bad for the new people. He says, you basically dismiss an entire argument against new races by trying to assume the mind state of the people who make the argument, but fail to provide any compelling counter-argument. Well, they just can't see past their own perspective. No, that's not true at all. I spent about 6 minutes answering that question, didn't I? And yes, I opened with the point that a lot of people are interested in their own experience. But following that, I have given a few arguments, and I guess if people are not listening to them, I'll do it again in a second. Anyway, very wrong. A new race has objectively very little impact on the game by itself. So vets won't like it for all the reasons you already assume. New players will very quickly realize this fact too, especially if they have vet friends or make them in-game. So who does a new race appeal to? The ignorant. People who played Guild Wars 2 before, or who haven't in so long that they don't really remember that race is meaningless. These people may have played other games where race matters a lot, so they have preconceived notions of what a new race means for an MMO. Just as a pause here, what other MMOs play with race to a really deep level? Like way beyond Guild Wars 2? Yeah, I think you can find arguments about skill balance a bit more, and I think they are meaningful too. But beyond that? Anyway, adding a new race would prey on these preconceived notions, convincing people who couldn't possibly know the reality of a new race in this MMO that it's something meaningful. It's a billboard, but the product doesn't back it up. So just to be clear then, your argument is that the admittedly powerful advertising effect of a new race is worth disappointing all these new players in a few weeks once they realize they were baited. I don't believe it is. The expansion should advertise on its real merits rather than trying to trick people through the door. But look how down the rabbit hole this comment is. This is ultimately why I believe this new race should not be done unless they do it 110%. That means a full Zaitan arc integration. probably voice acting, full and robust suite of leveling zones, character creation choices that affect which story instances you play, just like the other races. It would need to appear basically indistinguishable from one of the launch races. And lastly, as a character defense, I'm a raid and fractal instructor. I teach new players what their chosen class is capable of. My impetus for starting doing this was because I understand how arcane the game is for newbies and how much of a difficult curve getting to endgame can be. My focus is not getting players the best, but getting them through the door. I spent most of my time in Guild Wars 2 last year and a half directly interacting with relatively fresh, off-the-cart players and some vets, so I don't think I can say that my perspective is that of a jaded veteran. It is of a jaded veteran. First of all, what you're asking for, the full 110% thing, is an impossible request. It won't happen with the game, and it doesn't need to happen. Why does it have to be indistinguishable? Clearly, you can distinguish it in many other areas between core and POF, or core and Heart of Thorns. Neither of these were at the scale that the launch game was at. These things can have value even if they don't go the whole way. Now, in truth, I do agree that having a biography that affects story instances should be there for a new race. I've never taken that off the table. We actually haven't discussed it in End of Dragon specifically here. I do think that that's important. And yeah, I do think having a good number of leveling zones is important. But I mean, what are we saying for Corteria? That there were 25 leveling zones? So you want 25 leveling zones for the Tengu as well? Like, that's ludicrous. I think somewhere in the ballpark of 2 to, what did we say yesterday, 5, is adequate to provide a really good experience that, yes, is not tricking people, but is actually offering something real. See, what you are blind to the value of a new race, because you're saying, oh, it's meaningless, because you are a vet that is only interested in fractals and raids. You just admitted it yourself. You're an instructor for this endgame stuff, where racial skills don't matter, and race doesn't affect those endgame elements of the game. What you are casually dismissing is a good chunk of the game where people are leveling and they're enjoying their story and they're getting a kick out of how their character looks. These things do have value. It's not a trick. Guild Wars 2 isn't perfect, and yeah, they could maybe push the idea of your race mattering a bit more later, but for a lot of people, they are happy to be a Char or to be an Asura, and it has been of some value. They would be happy to be a Tengu as well. I don't deny for a second that a proportion of players in 2012 felt tricked. I think that they did feel tricked with their race. I think that some people came into this game expecting a traditional MMO with traditional gear grind and traditional end game structure and traditional views for races, and then realized that wasn't what they were playing. They felt tricked. And I think probably, yes, there would be people at End of Dragons who pick up the Tengu who feel the same way, but I do not think it's a majority. There are an overwhelming number of people who are happy that they got to pick a race in Guild Wars 2 and feel satisfied that every time they log in on that character, it has affected the way that the armor looks on them and the animations as they move around and so on. I'm actually amazed at how blind you are to your own biases towards just mechanical-oriented content at the end game, where race doesn't matter, and how wantonly oblivious you are to so many other facets of enjoyment and value people will get out of the game. I'm stunned by this comment at the top. Very wrong, a new race has objectively very little impact on the game itself. That's not objective. Just because it doesn't affect mechanics in combat, and that's numbers, that doesn't mean that that's quantifiable. People make their own decisions what areas of the game they enjoy. And I'll tell you what, you know this already, a shit ton of them don't play the end game stuff. They're playing areas of the game, often weighted heavily towards the early stuff, because not everyone who picks the game up ends up hardcore enough to beat the end game anyway, that the race does have more of an impact on. Okay, and so to close out of this little diatribe here, I've spent this whole time defending myself. Let me reiterate again, because I don't think I've done it quite well enough on End of Dragon so far, why this is so powerful. Because it's an argument you've failed to cross-examine at any point in your wall of text, and it's this. Very few people want to join an established MMO that's been going for years or however long, where they feel like they're going to be left behind, where they feel like they'll have no peers because everyone else has already been there and done that ages ago. So if you are just blindly thinking, like for me, right, if I was going to blindly think about going into Final Fantasy XIV right here, right now, today, which is something I've seriously been considering, one of the first things I immediately start thinking of is, oh man, I'm going to have years of stuff to learn and catch up with, and I bet basically no one's out there in the early game areas. Everything about the game is going to feel like a solved science already at this point, and I'm not sure I'm up for the idea of laboring away like a loner back in those early zones. If, however, there's a big moment with that MMO, it doesn't have to be FF14, any MMO, where it feels like a whole new energy has been infused into it, and there's a wave of noobs that I can be a part of where we discover and learn it together, I would feel that momentum, and that would push me into the game real quick. All my doubts would go away because I would be in the same ignorant position as a ton of other people, and I would feel comfort in that, and I would feel excitement in that, and I would go for that. And all it takes is the studio and the product itself to demonstrate to new potential consumers, me, that it is in that phase right now. You know, all MMOs always want to look welcoming, but you have this big moment where they shine a light and they say, hey, come in new, this is a great time to start. That is a powerful thing. That is what the introduction of a new race does. And listen, that's not a trick. That can't be taken away. If there is a renewed energy and enthusiasm that creates a wave of new people to join the game, that's there. Whether they later feel that the race itself has no substance, the movement that it created can never be lost, and it was of benefit to the game. And that is something Guild Wars desperately needs: more people. And listen, maybe hearing me respond now has just caused you to double down in your opinion, and you're not convinced whatsoever. Adding a new race to Guild Wars 2 is a terrible decision, and WP doesn't know what he's talking about. Fine, what's your proposal then to create this energy and this new wave that will bring people in en masse? You give me something more convincing than this idea of a new race, and I'll happily trade it away, and I'll say End of Dragon should go for that. But from where I'm sitting, I don't see anything better. What do you got? Next, we got a comment from Ailes, also about the idea of a new race, but this time tackling the idea that it would even be good at informing and tutorializing players. And just with the other comment a second ago, I think there's some really valid things in here. Hi WP, one thing I do not understand is why you keep pairing the notion of a new race and that of a new and improved leveling experience. It just doesn't work. People who choose their race, especially their first one, based on look and feel. You can be sure that most would not pick up the Tengu as their first character, so you cannot rely on that to be the better leveling experiences that teaches players how to play. In fact, you specifically mentioned World of Warcraft as an example, by stating the Worgen leveling experience was better than the previous ones. That example plays against your own point. Worgen to this day are one of the least played races in WoW, so very few people play through that experience. The way World of Warcraft has now addressed that problem is entirely different. They introduced a new starting leveling experience for all races, obligatory for your first character. It takes you from 1 to 10, and then you choose one of the old expansion campaigns to go from 10 to 50, so you're ready for the latest expansion. It's an elegant solution, and it remains functional as they keep adding new expansions. So to sum up, I do agree Guild Wars 2 would take advantage of a new and improved entry experience for new players, but it can't be an experience just bound to a new race, because most people would not choose that single new race. They never do. If I buy a new game and I want to play a human, I'm going to play a human, even if someone tells me that actually the Birdman entry experience is more recent and effective. Not to mention that the Birdman race, as much as Guild Wars 1 veterans may like the notion, is definitely not something that is going to be favoured by a majority of new players. A new entry experience for all races, at least on your first character, is what can solve this problem. Yeah, you know, I think you're totally right. I think I have been completely ignorant to this, and I haven't been thinking about it clearly enough. You know, years ago, I wrote these massive documents over on my Google Drive, all about the many ways I saw the devs could revamp Corteria and overhaul it, improve the way it teaches people about the game, but also fix issues with the story and the way that the biography worked and how the instances were laid out and difficulty and all this stuff. And one thing I was always wrestling with this stuff, because you're trying to be efficient, obviously, you want to imagine your proposal actually could occur, was that you can't really teach people or change the early game stuff, because there's 5 races, 3 biography choices. You've got 15 different instances. So if you want to teach someone how to dodge at the beginning of the personal story, in the personal story, you have to go to 15 different story steps, look at the content that's already in there, and then somehow add a dodging section in it that actually matters. If you want to teach people during their level 20 stuff how break bars work, maybe you feel like that's a good time. Again, you've got this huge problem. It's only when the story starts to come together later with the orders and then finally the pack storyline that maybe you can efficiently drop these updates in. But by that point, people are hours and hours and hours in, and you should really have given them this information even earlier. So what I kind of realized is you can't do it on a race-by-race basis. Not even if it's in the open world. You still have to do 5 times the work, because the tutorial stuff you've managed to add and filter in through the Caledon Forest now has to be replicated in Metrica and has to be replicated in Queensdale and so on. And I kind of came up with the concept of like a meta environment that you weave in and out of as the story goes along, and that's your tutorial area, and it shows you stuff, and all characters, regardless of their race or choices, will have these same instances, so you have to make them once. But that doesn't seem too elegant to me. I also had ideas that maybe you can delay it to like level 30, and a lot of the tutorialization happens in Lion's Arch, because ultimately it is this hub that everyone will go to. This could have been a way to pad out the order section of the storyline, so it feels like you rank up at a more reasonable rate instead of lightning fast. But it's tricky. And yes, it's still a problem even if you have a new expansion with a new leveling. You know, forget the idea of a new race for now. Just the idea that a new Guild Wars 2 expansion can give you the opportunity to level again. It's easy to be excited by that and grasp that with both hands and say, oh yeah, this can teach people how the game works and it could be amazing. But if it's still just a proportion of the user base actually playing in the new stuff, well, it's not going to resolve it. And you are right, I've even mentioned this on End of Dragons Daily before. You know, we're kind of excited about the Tengu as people who have been invested in this mystery and like what it's built to. But what really is there to latch onto? Not too much. I don't actually think it's that popular of a concept. If it was a super popular concept to be playing in, you know, a humanoid avian in fantasy, you would see it in more genres. You know, you would see it in these other MMOs more regularly, but you don't. It's just not something that captivates that many people. And yeah, I think that, you know, the Tengu player base, imagine Tengu had come out in 2012. The Tengu player base would probably be less than a sixth of the overall games community, because a vast majority of them are going to be playing human, and then you've got to divide the rest between all these other races. I think probably a very large proportion play the Sylvari as well, you know, because a lot of people like that elven kind of style, and Sylvari are the closest in this game. To be fair, I think when it comes to the idea of a 2021 expansion adding them, it would be a lot more than a sixth. I think they could leverage the new engine capabilities and graphics. You know, we talked a bit about visual fidelity and how compelling that is to and important that is to a lot of people before. I think you'd have all that going for you. You'd also have a lot of like has-been Guild Wars 2 players, you know, people who quit maybe like after Heart of Thorns and they haven't been back since then, or maybe even earlier. They would probably want to start from zero and they'd go for Tengu. And I do think that MMO players, whether they're new to Guild Wars doesn't really matter, just if they're veterans of the genre, they are so obsessed with whether their character will work at endgame and how fast they can level, and like everything's a race to these people. Very few take it slow and relish. I think that when the word got out that you can level to 80 quickest as a Tengu, or, you know, you get some other random little benefit, I don't know what, I think that you would get a very high proportion. I think most people would sort of hive mind Zerg to that one race. But it's not a complete solution, and maybe, yeah, this whole idea is something that I've kind of ran away with too much in these recent videos. And the truth is, as it's always been, and I hate to say this, it's a core Tyria overhaul we need. And after the new player experience 1 and 2 back in, what, 2013? I don't know whether ArenaNet will ever have the ambition for that, ever again. Even if it is, in my opinion, one of the most important things this whole game needs. Pretty sad stuff. And to both commenters there about, you know, the various discussions of adding a new race, thanks very much for your comments. I really appreciate them. Let's move on. We got Cookie Warchief, who says, hey WP, what do you think about the implementation of airships as housing and or a combat mechanic? We know that the Aether Blades are likely to play a role, and I'd say Sky Pirates would be a pretty decent selling point for an expansion. With all the moving platforms like the Sunqua Peak Islands, the Guild Wars 2 engine is at a point to support such a mechanic. Well, I think that's a bit rich to say. I think they're very careful and very minimal when they use this kind of stuff. We've seen it be used in certain ways, but that doesn't mean it's broadly applicable. But yeah, I kind of believe maybe they could put it off. Having, you know, the Dragonfall airship, for example, can fly in big circles around the map, but it doesn't necessarily pick new dynamic paths or move around like an NPC or a creature would, you know. Having your own skyship would give a new spin to player housing. There hasn't been a new lounge pass for a really long time, and having your own airship as a new hub that you can upgrade could be a replacement for that. Since decorating it would be a bit clunky, you could also use it to fly to your own island, where the game could let us use all decorations. We could also get the opportunity to recruit our crew. Different story playthrough options unlock different characters for our account. Maybe even it could be possible to have actual fights with the airships in metas, dragon response missions, strikes, raids, or in a lower capacity world versus world. Depending on the size of the airships, there could be a huge opportunity for meaningful masteries. Just imagine a ship like the Glory of Tyria, and the possibility of manning the ship with different types of fighters Cannoneers, Buccaneers, Megalith Engineers from different races. This might be a huge feature to implement, but it would be a great selling point into this expansion. It might be a huge feature. You just described a different game. You just described an airship-based MMO. Really? Look, I'm excited about all that stuff, obviously, and that sounds really cool. And I'm a big sucker for airships, and I like the idea of airship combat, and I like the idea of being able to customize my own home that flies around and stuff. But look, let's remember what game we're playing. We're playing Guild Wars 2, a sort of MMO-light experience where realistically all the maps are rectangles that are not that big, and there's these clunky ideas of portals and loading screens between them and so on. You have to be careful. A lot of the arguments against this kind of double up as the arguments against just naval combat and boats being a big mechanic, as we mentioned on some of the earlier End of Dragon stuff. Look, I love the inspiration and I love the enthusiasm. I'm coming at this question, though, from a place of, like, looking at how ambitious they've been with the other expansion features, and I just don't know. Look, I will give you a bit of wiggle room. They went really hard with mounts. If End of Dragons was doing this, and only this was the whole thing. Yeah, it's going to have a story. Yeah, it's going to have like 5 open world maps. And yes, it's going to have elite specializations. But after that, there's no fishing. There's no, what did we say? Dueling 500. There's no legendaries. Every single mastery is based purely on this. The story instances don't really push in any way. You know, it's hyper refined. Even more refined than Path of Fire was. If they did that, maybe you could see it. And I really do believe maybe you could see it. But then we're in this weird place where it's like, okay, imagine your ArenaNet, and you know that's you're going to have to focus that much on this. Is it a gamble you want to take? Are you going to put all chips in this basket? Is this really what the industry is calling for right now? You know, because you have to follow that kind of stuff to a certain degree. And I don't know whether they would. I like the idea, man. But look, this is like a Project Tyria idea, isn't it? It's a game called The Mists, and in it you play as Aetherblade crews that are going around fighting on your airship. What was that? There was a cooperative airship-based game that was a huge hit maybe 5 years ago. You know, an MMO version of that. So look, I'm excited about it, and if when we start seeing more trailers, we see even more emphasis on the airships and stuff, maybe they'll do it. I could even see some great pairings of this with the idea of fighting multiple Elder Dragons. Think of that Aurene instance where we're flying alongside Kralkatorrik blasting him, except they do that again. It's just everyone's on airships and, you know, there's multiple dragons flying around. I could see it, but my gut says no. One thing, though, I think you've been really smart to identify that could be a sign of some form of player housing in the expansion. They haven't done any lobbies for ages, have they? I think that the lobbies were always a mistake. And, you know, people always have these discussions about, oh, they can't add new cities because it will spread people out too thin and so on. You know, these arguments are so antiquated now. In a world where most people are hanging out like AFK in World versus World, or in many different lobbies, or in fractals, or wherever their guild halls, you know, this is just not realistic anymore to think about. People are so spread out all over the place. And I think it was a bit of a mistake. But they haven't been adding more of them, and maybe that is because player housing truly will be something they look at. And whether that integrates with the home instance or looks like a new home instance, I don't know. Also, you've even mentioned this idea of recruiting NPCs onto your airship, just as we recruited players back into our home instance back at launch. I would love to see ArenaNet look back at those early ambitions and say, okay, in our new expansion, we're going to return to this idea, but we're going to do it really well this time, because this is the mistake we made, this is the mistake we made in this in 2012. Well, now we want to, you know, really pay off on that. If anything that End of Dragons does can pay off deeper on stuff stated in the manifesto, you know, pre-2012 press, I think that's incredible. That's also why I would be kind of interested to see a new, fresh esports look. But I'll hold my tongue there. I know I have absolutely no support from a single viewer on that one. Lastly, another little important correction for me here. Alexis Torin says, you often say roller beetles are a specifically Canton thing because the Guild Wars 1's roller beetle racing took place on the Xingji boardwalk. But in fact, Ilona, more specifically Vabi, was the only place we saw them in the wild. So perhaps Xingji's roller beetles were imported? Yeah, a couple of you guys left comments like this. It's funny how, as time has passed, my memories of where the roller beetles were from has shifted, because if I really stop and think about it, yeah, there aren't any wild roller beetles anywhere, not even in like the Winds of Change stuff. they were nightfall. And it's a weird thing as well. I don't remember this. Does that mean that there was no roller beetle racing or the Xingji boardwalk and stuff until after the Nightfall expansion came out? Like, they didn't have that model or anything, and then they just happened to put it back in that festival? That's so weird to think about. I think you're right, they probably were imported. And what does that mean for Guild Wars 2, now that they're more isolationists and stuff, and we haven't heard of any active trade, unless they've been breeding their own variety of them down there? Maybe you won't see anything about the roller beetle ever again. Maybe it will just forever be a corner thing, and you best get that bit of living world, because End of Dragons has no ambition for them whatsoever. Well, unfortunately, I'm going to have to stop there. We've only got a couple of comments in today, really. But they were such long discussions. I hope you guys enjoy the long-form discussions. The problem is now, I've kind of got all chips in for today on these topics. And if they were boring topics, then we've ruined the video to a certain degree. I collected a ton of other stuff. These gem store things I alluded to. Maybe I'll just grab these for tomorrow or something. We'll try and fit a bonus thing in. I don't know. Or I'll just have to start being a bit shorter with my answers. In any case, thank you guys so much for watching. I will be back tomorrow for more End of Dragons Daily, and I've got more plans for other cool videos. If you missed it, I did do a little conversation about the Dragon Response missions I'd like to see. But sadly, once I posted it, people kind of pointed out everything's been data mined, it seemed. So there's not really much to speculate about there, and it seems like a bit of an odd video in retrospect now. Nonetheless, thank you for continuing to watch, guys. I hope you're enjoying, and I will see you tomorrow. Hopefully we can keep the series growing.